Welcome to Tangled Twists. I'm Melissa, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be exploring card weaving. Card weaving or tablet weaving is something that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. I wear a lot of what I call Viking modern. This is one of my Viking modern shirts. So when I say Viking modern, it means modern-ish clothes that are inspired by the Iron Age or Viking Age styles. Most things are square cut, and I have a lot of layers. So I'll have like my long sleeve tunics, and then I could have a wool tunic that I wear over that. They're great for layering in winter, but because everything's square cut, they're not particularly shapely. They tend to be rather boxy. So you need belts. And historically, the belts would have been made by something called card or tablet weaving, where you take these little tablets and you thread yarn through the holes. When you rotate them, it makes openings for you to pass a shuttle through. And as you run that back and forth, it makes a narrow band of cloth. I am a complete tablet weaving novice, but I am not a complete weaving novice. I've always been fascinated by weaving, and I've taken a couple classes a very, very long time ago. So I know a little bit of what might happen, but as I said, I'd been interested in this for a while, and at one point I actually got my partner some books on it because we thought she might be interested in it, and I still have those books. So I have referenced them, and I found this lovely pattern, number 3 here, that looks like a great place to start, and I am going to be playing with some tablet weaving. Getting this project started means crawling all around on my floor to measure out the length that I need for my warp threads. The patterns of tablet weaving are all made from the warp threads, so that's where all of the main color pieces have to come from, and I need this to be long enough to work as a belt. I have measured the little yellow belt that you see on my ironing board to get an idea of how long I need this to be, and I've added 10% for take up because I have no idea how this is going to work out. And I go ahead and tie my yarn to my ironing board and start wrapping it between my ironing board and my chair. This process does take a significant amount of time. Each card has 4 holes, each hole gets a thread, and they all need to be specific colors. I don't have a warping board because I've never done this before, and warping boards are expensive. So I just have to keep going back and forth and back and forth. It actually really hurt my back after a while because I was all hunched over. I have to stop and periodically check how many threads that I have. I count through those just to make sure before I cut them free when I have the appropriate number. But this was a very time-intensive process. It was not terribly pleasant, and if this is something that I end up doing a lot of, I need a better method because this one is really, really rough. But after about 30 minutes, I had the specified amount of yarns cut to be able to set up my cards. I'm using a 3-color pattern from this lovely little book here, and then I have to start setting up my cards. I've never used these cards before, so it's suggested that you number them so you have a better chance of keeping track of everything and finding out if something gets put in a position where it isn't supposed to be. Then I have to start threading all of those threads through the cards. I'm double checking on this because the way you put the threads through the cards matters, and these 2 books weren't written by the same person, and everybody notates this just a little bit differently. It can be very frustrating, but 1 card at a time, following the diagram that's given, I pick the color threads that are indicated and run them through the indicated hole. They're labeled A through D. And again, 1 at a time. I think this pattern was 24 cards, 24 times 4 threads each. This is a process. It takes a fair amount of time, and you have all of this thread that you're trying desperately not to get tangled up. Each card's yarn bundle is knotted separately, but you do need to connect them to be able to put tension on this. So I'm straightening out all of those knots so that I can tie a big knot that I can use when I'm tensioning the warp to move to the next step, because I have this giant mass of very long pieces of yarn, and they are really tangled up. So the next step is to secure the collection of threads to something heavy and start combing the warp. That's getting all of those tangles out so that I can work the threads down to the end and start weaving on it. I've secured them to my pool ladder weights because they were the heaviest thing I had around, and I used a combination of finger combing and gentle unknotting. None of these strands are knotted because of the way that I put them together. They're at worst twisted together. So I started by combing, and then I started working the cards slowly down because I realized that I could comb them forever and I would never know where I actually had them. So once I start working the cards down the length, it really gave me a good idea of how much more combing needed to be done. I've got my cards all set up to go, I think, and I've already made a couple novice mistakes. When I set up my cards, I didn't pay close enough attention to where A and D are. They're supposed to be facing up, which they're not right now. I'm going to have to correct that by rotating them, which is going to put a little bit of extra twist in this project. That shouldn't be a problem because it's just going to be the one. We'll find out. Since I've never done this before, I have no idea. The other thing that happened when I was combing my warp is this fell out. I don't know if this was a little bit of the thread that had snapped when I was setting up the warp, or if one of my warp threads broke while I was cleaning them up. I didn't notice anything coming out of this at a weird angle. That doesn't mean there isn't something, but I haven't seen it, so that's something I have to keep an eye out for. But let's see if I can get tension on this. You can already kind of see where the pattern's going to be, which is awesome. That is very, very cool. And now I just have to start weaving. The weaving process is pretty straightforward, at least it is if you've done things correctly. You'll notice I'm sorting through some cards here, and I've undone that knot at the end that's holding everything together. That's because on my very first twist attempt, one of my cards refused to move, and the reason for that was because one thread on that card was threaded in the wrong direction, and that effectively locked that card in place and prevented it from turning. So I had to sort that out, comb the ends back down a little bit to get them even, and re-knot them. I will then use that knot to connect to a ribbon that I've tied around my waist. I'm doing this more of the belt style, so I have a ribbon loop that I can put that knot through, and then when I lean back, it provides the tension that I need for weaving. I can then grab my shuttle and work a thread through and start working with my turns. Card weaving is interesting in that you make the shed, that's the space that your shuttle goes through, by twisting the cards, and all of the threads kind of rotate. As I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep a little bit of space on the thread that I'm running back and forth. That's called the weft. It was suggested in the books that you do the first couple turns really lightly and use that to start setting everything up. So that's what I'm trying to do here to help keep tension. So before I pass the shuttle through, I go ahead and I beat that shed down. And as I make the turns, you can see that a pattern starts to emerge. The longer that you work on this, the more pattern that you'll see. This pattern called for 4 turns forward and 4 turns backward to make the diamond shape pattern, and I just absolutely love watching this happen. Every twist of the cards reveals a different thread color on top, so you can watch the pattern emerge in a couple different places. And as you get used to it, it didn't seem like that would be true, but you can actually kind of tell whether you should be turning your cards forward or backward based on what you can see of the pattern in the threads as it's emerging. And it was just a really satisfying and surprisingly quick way to make a textile that could be used for a belt, a garter, or even for trim. This is my very first tablet weaving belt. I am totally in love with it. It is phenomenal. I wasn't really sure that I was going to like how it would come out. It's not using amazing yarn. This is actually from my grandmother's stash. It was intended for a knitting machine, and it fuzzed and gave me a couple of problems. And this belt isn't perfect. It's got a number of flaws to it. So initially my tension was really loose, and it made for much tighter squares. They're a lot more square shaped than they are diamond shape. Near the end, they become a little bit more diamond shape. So you can see how that tension tightened up as I got more used to weaving. Also, the edges are a little bit wonky. That's not unsurprising for a first weaving attempt. It is very common for weavers who are new at what they're doing to have difficulty with the tension, and it makes the edges kind of wobbly. That's something that you get better with practice. There are a couple of mistakes that I've made. That is also very common. You can see I got lost on my pattern here and here. I don't think that happened anywhere else, but again, when you're not used to doing something, it is very, very easy to make mistakes. There was one thing that I thought was a flaw to my actual weaving if I had threaded something wrong, and that's that little dot right there. That's not actually a flaw, apparently. That is a thing that is in the weaving. I went back and I looked at it, and you can see on the chart how there's that little bitty spot. So that is present. Apparently that's okay. I wasn't expecting that, but I also really wasn't expecting how fast this was going to be. This is a really quick project. It took me a couple hours over like 2 days to do this. So very excited about that because I love the idea that I can make my own belts now. I have a number that I have that I love that are wool. Several of them are from Norwegian weavers. They're awesome, they're amazing, but I have this thing about liking to make my own stuff. So now I have that ability, and I am very much looking forward to continuing to play with this and to learn what else I can make. So stick around, I will be doing the rest of my Viking kit at some point. This one just got a little bit ahead of me because it went a tiny bit faster than I was expecting. I'll see you next time.